Deputy Speaker, can I rise to firstly, of course, acknowledge traditional country, the Ngambri and the Ngunnawal people of this part of Australia. I rise to acknowledge today, as many other people have done, including the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, the passing of Dr. Mabo. Dr. Mabo was an activist for social justice, for human rights, for her people. She was an educator. She was one of 10 children and a mother of 10 herself. I knew her and her family. She was the daughter of the South Sea Islands, and a mother who raised Torres Strait Islander children, and that combination, of course, is something that we see very much in Northern Australia. Dr. Mabo's story is the story of First Nations women in this country. Her history is the history of First Nations women. She, of course, was married to one of the most famous Torres Strait Islanders that we have seen in our nation's story. And that, of course, that was Eddie Koiki Mabo. Bonita herself was a descendant of Vanuatuans. And, of course, that shameful story of blackbirding in our country, part of the Australian truth-telling, is something that is not well known. She described her first time that she met Eddie as love at first sight. And I've heard Eddie's voice on the radio saying the same thing. They married in Ingham in 1959, and between them they had 7 children of their own and adopted 3 into their family. Such is the way with First Nations people. The Mabo name is, as I said, synonymous with the component of reconciliation, of truth-telling. The great truth of this nation, one that our maps and up until recently our public discourse has denied. When we travel across our continent, we travel through hundreds of individual sovereign nation states, each with their own laws, customs and histories that were never lost or forgotten by our people. It was in 1972 that Eddie began the battle with the support of course, Bonita and his family and his community, the battle for justice and land rights. When he, Bonita and their family were refused permission by the Queensland government to return to Mare Island where Eddie's father was dying, of course it was a seminal moment and a part of that terrible, terrible injustice that many people have faced in this country. The 1992 High Court decision 20 years later and the subsequent passage of the 1993 Native Title Act in this place marked a fundamental shift in the place of First Nations people in this country. Dr. Mabo said at this time, "I was his wife, and that's as far as it went. I've got nothing to do with the land. That was his fight. He had to fight for his land. It was hard at times. When things were a bit tough on him, I had to wear it. But other than that, I knew it was hard for him, and I couldn't do anything to help. We just hung in there." And of course, Eddie never lived to see that famous decision, that wonderful decision in 1992. And he certainly didn't see the passage of the Native Title Act in 1993. But whilst he didn't see it himself, his family did, his community did, and that was what's important. Bonita Mabo put her family first, and we can see that in her actions. We also know that for many tens of thousands of years, First Nation women have been responsible for carrying out dreaming stories, songlines, languages, knowledge and raising children that have kept our culture strong and enriched us as the oldest continuing culture on the planet. And Dr. Mabo embraced this. She exemplified it. In 1973, she co-founded and operated her husband's, the Townsville Black Community School. It was revolutionary at the time, and I actually have memories of that revolution. Disenchanted with the Queensland curriculum's approach to Indigenous education, Eddie and 2 other teachers worked for half pay to help establish the school, and Bonita worked as an organiser and teacher's assistant. The school and the concept of the school were received with hostilities of the political environment of the era, from politicians to the media to the local community. It is difficult to envisage undertaking such an innovative and groundbreaking initiative at the height of the Bjelke-Petersen era, knowing full well that they would be met with such misplaced rage and misunderstanding. Such is the mark of the woman. The then State Minister for Education denounced the motives of the students' parents, declaring their attitudes as racist and the school as apartheid in reverse. So ironic in the Bjelke-Petersen era. The school, which at its peak had 45 students enrolled in the late 70s, reshaped our attitudes towards the importance of Indigenous education and the significance of Indigenous culture and history, not just for First Nations children, but for all Australian children. Eddie died 6 months before the handing down of the High Court decision, as I said, and Bonita supported Eddie throughout this time, whilst raising her family and dealing with the many things that she had to deal with. And of course, Bonita's was a quiet, solid person, and she quietly went about her business. And there is a saying, of course, that still waters run deep. She was stoic, determined, and quietly impatient. And so it is that Bonita's story and the story of First Nations women, these strong First Nations women, you will seldom see on television. But I tell you, she is a hero for so many. She helped so many, and she meant an enormous amount to every single Australian. It was just last year, of course, the 25th anniversary of the Mabo decision. I remember Bonita coming to this place with her daughter Gail, whom I know very well. And of course, Jenny Macklin, who had been a great friend to Bonita for so long. And that was a celebration. Bonita, in her wheelchair with Gail, came onto the floor of the Parliament, and then everyone celebrated her being there and celebrated why she was there. What was so touching is just 4 days before Dr. Mabo's death, she was awarded an honorary doctorate of letters by James Cook University. Such a fitting thing to happen. Of course, her husband, Eddie, had worked there as a groundsman many years before. It would have been difficult to envisage back in 73, 45 years ago this year, in the early days of the Townsville black community, with what the press was saying at the time, and with our political leaders were saying at the time. It would have been difficult to envisage back then unanimous praise in our Parliament from the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. I was so pleased when both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition marked the passing of Bonita Mabo. Her deeds, her example and her story show us that what may seem scary and fearful, uncharted or unprecedented today can be our history, our legacy tomorrow. Of course, there is a great desire in this nation now for the need for truth-telling. And really, I will never forget the role that Bonita and her family and her late husband played in terms of telling the truth in this country. That High Court decision was remarkable. For all of us as Australians, throughout the legal doctrine of terra nullius, and for the first time in 1992, recognised Aboriginal people's connection to country. I know that the member for Jagga Jagga, Jenny Macklin, was a very close friend of Bonita, and I particularly want to mention Jenny and that relationship today. I say to Gail and her family, we won't be able to be there in Townsville tomorrow for the state funeral, and I'm very pleased that the Palaszczuk government has determined that it should be a state funeral. It's absolutely fitting. But every single member of this Parliament, on both sides of Parliament, will take, I'm sure, a moment just to reflect on the Bonita Mabo story, of the story of her family, and the incredible role that her family has played in shaping this story of this nation, a role that all of us are recipients of, and a role that has made Australia a very, very, very much better place. So finally, I say once again to Gail and our family, we can't be there tomorrow. There will be representatives, I'm sure, but our thoughts are with you for your mum's next journey in life.
Thank the member for Barton for her heartfelt words. I call